We'll call the Monday, December 15th, 2014 regular meeting of the Eugene Planning Commission to order. And as is our custom, we reserve a few minutes at the beginning of each meeting for the public to comment on any matter except items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record has already closed. We generally like to limit that to 3 minutes. And I believe we have one person wishing to speak. So, Mike? And please state your name and address and
Sure.
all that.
Good morning. My name is Mike Reeder. I'm an attorney with the law firm Arnold Gallagher, 800 Willamette Street, Suite 800. And I represent the DAG Trust Partnerships, as you know. And these are the folks who own the DAG Trust Partnership own the property in West 11th, south of Crow Road. And we have provided the Planning Commission and the City Council some written material regarding our request that the Planning Commission and the City Council seriously consider the inclusion of the DAG Trust property into the UGB expansion as part of Envision Eugene. And we have provided the Planning Commission as well as the City Council with some legal analysis for why we believe it's within the discretion of the city to consider the property, notwithstanding the fact that the property is designated by the Metro Plan as forest and by the county as forest. And I've provided the City Council with a response to the email that was sent to the Planning Commission from Mia Nelson. And I've had an opportunity to further refine that legal analysis, and I've provided some of that analysis to the Assistant City Attorney, Ann Davies. But I wanted to just briefly take a second to provide the Planning Commission with opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So rather than just watching emails and letters come back and forth, I wanted to come before you and respond to any questions you might have regarding this. Now, the caveat is we believe that the city has the discretion whether or not to bring in the DAG Trust Partnership property. They are not required to do so. That is not our position. However, in listening to the discussion by the City Council, and the discussion by the TRG and this Planning Commission, it's apparent to us that the city is having a difficult time trying to figure out the best place to expand the urban growth boundary because there are so many precious lands around the city of Eugene. It's been said that there is no good place to grow. We disagree. We think that this is a good place to grow, and we are willing to provide the Planning Commission and the City Council, and then ultimately the Board of Commissioners and the state with an exhaustive analysis for why this makes sense for the city of Eugene to grow in this location. And we'll be able to provide that to you as part of the formal adoption process.
Thank you. Are there questions from the Commission for Mr. Reeder? Okay.
Well, it was my understanding from staff that it was taken off because it was zoned forest land, and we would have to exclude all of the exception areas for us first before we could start looking at those types of lands. I don't understand the argument that the DAG Trust is putting forward.
Okay, so there are two responses to that. The first response is that state law does actually allow you to include property that is lower priority property, such as the DAG Trust property, which is designated forest, in two circumstances ahead of exception property. The first one is if you were to choose the Willow Creek study area as the area to be brought in under your alternatives analysis for the rural residential or exception property, then you are allowed to bring intervening property, lower order intervening property, in this case the DAG Trust property, in order to make a complete community. And that was the West Lynn case that I cited in my letter to the City Council that you should have been provided a copy with. So that case stands for that West Lynn case stands for the proposition that the city has the discretion to make complete communities, that you don't necessarily just have to pick and choose exception property and bolt it on to the current urban growth boundary. And we believe that this is a prime candidate for a complete community. And we've hired Colin MacArthur and Arnold Kogan to help develop a complete communities concept for this property. Number two, we believe that under the priority scheme that the state has established, you have the ability to say, of all of these exception properties that we're looking at, in this particular case, the Bloomberg-McVeigh study area and the Bailey Hill-Gimple Hill area, and there was some discussion about Crest Chambers, you have the ability to say, for economic, social, environmental, and energy reasons, we don't think that these are appropriate areas to even consider. So one example is for Bloomberg, you could say, look, in order to bring this property into the urban growth boundary, we're going to have to look at how this area is going to relate to the rest of Eugene. Are these folks going to be using I-5 as, in a way that we don't want them to use it for local trips? Do we want them to use 30th Avenue, which right now is constrained? Do we want to include a residential area that is far away from where we're trying to expand for our industrial? No, we want to limit our vehicle miles traveled, so therefore this particular study area is not an appropriate study area to look at. There are ways that you can go through that analysis, and other jurisdictions have done that. So it's not just looking at infrastructure and infrastructure costs. It's the entire SC analysis that you can do. So there are two methods that there are two legal pathways to considering the DAG Trust property.
Thank you.
Other questions from Commission at this point?
Can you just, for the benefit of the Planning Commission, summarize your highlight points of why you believe this should be elevated?
Well, yeah, there's numerous reasons, but one of the main reasons is you have a piece of property that is bordered on two sides of the urban growth boundary. On the west side of that property, you have Heinex. You have an underutilized industrial area. And then to the north, you have an area of town that has been in the urban growth boundaries for over 30 years that now has sanitary sewer, has water, and transportation capacity that for decades, they've not been able to develop that property to urban level densities. The city has already determined that area, that Crow Road area, needs to be developed as part of the 20-year growth cycle. In other words, that area is on the buildable lands inventory. The city necessarily has to provide services to that area that currently doesn't have those services. So by bringing in the DAG Trust property and the Willow Creek study area, you can leverage those costs. So for example, if you needed an elementary school or a fire station in that area, well, that additional area that you would bring in under a complete communities concept would be able to piggyback off of the infrastructure that's already required, and you get your bigger bang for your buck. Number two, it's just a fantastic site. If you want a site that's actually going to develop and developers are going to actually want to site homes on, you have the ability to do that because it's a desirable site with views, and because there's one property owner for the majority of that property, you have the opportunity to leverage other amenities such as the extension of the Ridgeline Trail, open spaces, put in some areas designated solely for affordable housing that you can't do. Remember the Bascom Village fiasco that we had? You had people who didn't realize that there was an area land banked for affordable housing, and the area grew up around that, and you had neighbors who were concerned about their property values. If you have a blank slate, you can design and plan for that and mitigate for any perceived difficulty that folks have with affordable housing. You've got a blank slate. It's something that the city has the ability to work through. And what I'm saying is you don't have to hamstring yourself and say, we can't consider this, because you certainly can. Oh, one last thing. You're also closer to your employment. You're very close to the 3,000 jobs that you're trying to get in Clear Lake Road area.
Commissioner Baker.
I have a question for staff. Now, we have a commitment to preserve.
Speaking to the mic.
We have a commitment to preserve forest and agricultural lands. Is it conceivable that this could be considered for forest reserve? In other words, not brought in for residential, but in some future date be brought in as a forest reserve, like we bring in some other property that might be ultimately used for open space or whatever?
So we don't have a forest reserve designation. Are you talking about like parks and open space, or
Right, yeah. In other words, the state has determined, or somehow during the process, various parts of the area around Eugene have been determined to be high-quality agricultural lands. This area has been designated as a high-quality forest land. The purpose would be that you would want to preserve that in perpetuity for some while, so you would be able to grow trees efficiently on it. Would we have any ability to utilize that in some other way? In other words, not for housing.
Okay,
Not
well-
destroy its characteristic as a place for growing trees.
and you're asking about bringing it into the urban growth boundary for that purpose?
Some future date, not
Okay.
for this residential purpose.
I'm not sure that we have any tools at this point, but just really quick backing up. So the plan designations outside the urban growth boundary were actually established by Lane County, and
Okay.
there's varying degrees of soil. Some of the farmlands don't have high-value soils, just as some of the forest parcels maybe aren't as productive as others. But that being said, I don't know what tools we have right now to bring in property, except for in the instance of, we have Ridgeline Trail properties that the city owns, and those are obviously, preserved as open space and recreational lands.
But I would say we would have to show a need. As in with any of the lands that we're bringing in, we have to document a need. We don't, if we're bringing it in, for instance, as parkland, specifically Ridgeline Trail, there isn't a need for urbanized services in a Ridgeline Trail property. So I think that would be a difficult argument to make, and it's certainly not something that we have documented in our current plans.
Right. No, I know in the past we've talked about reserves of various
Yes.
kinds.
Yes.
And it wouldn't have to necessarily be industrial or residential. We could consider other kinds of reserves.
So in the Portland, the metro area, they actually have the ability through state law to have both urban reserves, the areas that they want to look to for urbanizing in the future, and they also have rural reserves. So it's kind of this trade-off. We'll plan to grow here in the future, but we'll preserve this same area for the next 50 years. Right now, we don't have the ability to do that. It would take a change of state law. But it is something that is intriguing.
It is.
Commissioner Duncan.
Mine was kind of a procedural question. We seem to be getting,
Yeah.
I'm curious as to where we're going.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about the property, but
Okay.
out of
Maybe
curiosity.
not in this
Yeah.
at this time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think we might possibly lead us to some challenges.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
We do have a lot of material to
Yeah,
cover.
we
too.
do. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Thank you.
Okay. Next is the UGB preliminary recommendation for single-family homes. And that is, I believe, Alyssa and Carolyn?
Yeah, I'll just kick it off real quick. We thought it would be helpful to present to you the presentation that we made to City Council last week. You've seen the presentation regarding jobs, parks, and schools. Terry provided that to you earlier, but you really haven't seen our recommendation for single-family homes, and we wanted to make sure you're fully informed. And so we're just bringing that to you today. I just wanted to start off with a little bit of context about the timeline. This is really 5 years in the making, this recommendation. And just to remind you, we began this work on Envision Eugene back in 2010, and we really spent the first 2 years doing in-depth community outreach to come to a common vision for what Eugene's future would be. And that was reflected in the 2012 Envision Eugene recommendation that then City Council reviewed, made a few changes to, and then directed us to go and implement that plan. So the first thing that we did was we really focused on our efficiency measures and how we would grow more compactly inside our existing UGB. We are able to accommodate 92% of our future jobs and 96% of our future homes, and as well as 100% of commercial jobs and multifamily housing inside the urban growth boundary. And some of the efficiency measures that are listed up there that I won't bore you with, you are well aware of them, have helped us to accommodate those needs and really grow in a more compact way for the future. But there are some remaining needs that we have identified and that Council directed us to look at urban growth boundary expansion in order to accommodate. And so today we're going to share with you the recommendation regarding jobs. And I'm sorry, regarding homes, not regarding jobs. And then just for everybody at home who's tuned in watching this, our next steps, we do have an online open house that is actually up and running right now. It's on envisioneugene.org where all of this information is available. There is a link to a survey where people can weigh in and tell us what they think. There is a scheduled in-person open house on January 13th. From 4 to 6 here in the Atrium. And that's really, we want to give people a chance to understand the recommendation, and then on January 20th there's an opportunity to speak in front of City Council at a public forum in order to provide input into the Council's decision. We have a work session with Council on January 28th where we do hope that they are able to provide us with direction for how to move into our formal adoption process, which begins then in probably in the spring of 2015. And as we've talked about before, that this commission has a role in collaboration with the Lane County Planning Commission to hold public hearings, deliberate, and provide a recommendation to the City Council and the Lane County Board of Commissioners, who also hold a public hearing, deliberate, and then adopt. And then we send that to the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development for acknowledgement. So all that needs to happen before a final decision is made. So there's still a lot of opportunities for input and for learning as we go here. So before I hand it over to Alyssa, I'd just like to say that staff worked really hard to find the right balance in this recommendation. And I wouldn't say that there weren't any good places to go, but there's no easy places to go. And but we really worked hard to find the right balance. We believe that our recommendation is consistent with state law, and it also meets some of our long-term goals that were outlined in the community's vision for the future. We did look at minimizing costs, but that's not all we looked at. We also looked again at what are those long-term goals and how do we balance costs and what we want to become in the future. And we also spent a lot of time thinking about how do we grow in the future in a way that that builds on Eugene's assets. And so you'll see some of those as Alyssa walks you through the recommendation. So with that, I will turn it back to Alyssa.
So I am going to give you the presentation that I gave to City Council last week. You have seen actually quite a bit of the information, so I'll try to move through that fairly quickly. But
would it be better to have the lights down? Would we be able to see it better?
Sure.
Yes, no?
I'll actually look to you guys because you can open the blinds and then hit the light.
Maybe, yeah. The screen tends to wash out.
Question is, can I see my notes? Turn my flashlight on. There we go. Oh, that's much
That's
better.
good.
Thank you, Terry. That one, yeah, you get the roof. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so single-family homes. So this probably looks familiar. This, again, is the 2012 Envision Eugene recommendation for single-family homes. At that time, for urban growth boundary expansion, there were two areas proposed. Clear Lake to the southwest of the airport. You can see that circled up there. And Bailey Hill, Gimple Hill area southwest of the current urban growth boundary, kind of in the lower left. The recommendation was a balance between accommodating homes inside the urban growth boundary while maintaining the livability and sense of place that we love. And again, this is the 2012 recommendation, so this is what we've been working on updating and refining. Following this recommendation back in 2012, the City Council directed staff to consider two other areas. These were the Lane Community College Basin area, and then a property just west of the former Hynex site that you just heard information about, owned by the DAG Trust. At the time of that direction, staff made it clear that we would need to evaluate the entire UGB study area as required by state law and not just focus on areas identified as preferences. So again, this is Eugene's current urban growth boundary, and it was established back in 1982 and has served us in its current form for over 30 years and it has accommodated all of our housing needs since that time. By embracing the concept of compact development and using our land responsibly, effectively, and efficiently, we've been able to maintain this urban growth boundary. As we look ahead to the next 20 years, the Envision Eugene recommendation focuses on accommodating the vast majority of our future housing need inside our current UGB, with a modest expansion for single-family homes. Before I present the preliminary recommendation for where that expansion should occur, I do want to just walk you all briefly through the steps of the analysis that led to the recommendation. Like we've talked about before, the UGB expansion process is tightly controlled by a complex and prescriptive set of state laws. And we'll just go through those real quick. So first, we have to determine that the city actually has a need to expand. You can't just decide to expand. You have to need to expand. And we've determined that over 94% of our single-family homes can fit inside the current urban growth boundary. That's about 8,200 homes, and we anticipate those occurring on vacant land that's partially developed, and as well as on land that was recently redesignated to single-family homes. The remaining or unmet need is approximately 530 homes, and that requires the urban growth boundary expansion. Now, there was a lot that went into this determination. As you know, it's not as simple as a pie chart. Things that this was based on included the adopted 20-year population forecast, City Council direction to use a housing mix of 55 single-family, 45 multifamily for new housing over the next 20 years, and well as many, many other assumptions and technical data. So we've talked about this before, but again, this is our general study area for a UGB expansion. It's generally it's land within a half mile of the urban growth boundary, plus all the land within the metro plan. The next step is to categorize these by their plan designation that was given to them by the county. So the rust-colored lands, again, we don't have any of our first priority, which would be urban reserves. And so we start with the lands that are rust-colored as our first priority for expansion, and those are essentially lands that are residential, industrial, commercial, or government and education as determined by the county. If there's not enough of those lands, our next category would be those that are kind of teal colored. Those are marginal lands. They have marginal resource value. And then finally, our last priority for expansion are in that seafoam green, grayish color, and those are the agricultural and forest lands. This map just shows the lands that are really our first priority for expansion. You'll notice that obviously Clear Lake is not on this, and we are no longer proposing that for housing. That is part of the jobs package. but it's also not one of our first priorities. So we think that would have made it extremely difficult as well. So next step is to exclude those lands that are not buildable or suitable, and this is based on specific characteristics that are spelled out in state law. Again, those include publicly owned lands that are not suitable or available for single-family housing, lands that are wholly or predominantly within the floodplain, lands that are severely constrained by steep slopes, lands that are in areas with severe negative compatibility issues, and then those lands that cannot reasonably be provided public facilities and services. So once we exclude those lands, we are left with these 5 remaining areas. And it's important to note that within these 5 areas, that there is enough land to accommodate our housing need of 530 homes. So that means at this step, state law requires that we do a comparative analysis of these 5 study areas and see which area or areas or portions of these areas will best meet our need for an urban growth boundary expansion. I should mention that it is true, we can take in some resource land that would connect us to the urban, either that would get us to the urban growth boundary, or if it was necessary to provide services, because obviously there are some of these that aren't necessarily contiguous to the urban growth boundary, or there's some holes in between the different study areas. So, we can look at taking in some forest land to make these whole. We can't really create an island out there. These are the factors that are spelled out in state law that we look at for the comparative analysis. And it's really a balancing and weighing exercise, again, to determine which of these remaining areas will best meet our needs. As you know from some of the maps you've looked at, we conducted an extensive and exhaustive site analysis of these 5 remaining areas. And again, these are the kinds of things that we poured over a lot of maps. I'm not going to be going into those details today. You have some of the maps in your handout, and there's a number of them online as well. But I will give you a little bit of information about each of the study areas. Let's see. Just starting with the 2 on the left, which are Crow Road is the northernmost one on the left, and then immediate below that is along Willow Creek. I'm going to start with those. So during our evaluation, it was evident early on that these 2 areas were just really not on par with the others for a variety of reasons, including active farm use. It's actually the only study area that has active farm use in the area is in Crow Road, and exceptionally high service costs for Willow Creek. So at that point, we knew that our focus would really be on these 3 study areas. So just real quick. You want to say something?
I was just going to say, last time we were here with the Planning Commission, you asked for more information about cost analysis for those 2 areas, and that information is in your packet.
You gave it to us last time.
Yeah, I think we had that last time.
Okay. Great.
Commissioner Baker?
What you asked for is it broken out by sub areas, and
Yes.
that's what's in your packet. Yeah.
I wanted to just make a note just for other commissioners that the Crow Road, the numbers are very deceiving because of the CR1 is only 13 units, and you're paying for the whole fire station there. So if you combined CR1 and 2, the price for that area comes down to $94,000. In other words, you could look at this and sort of automatically reject Crow Road because for the 13 units you got a $500,000 price per unit. But
Will you be addressing some of these costs?
We can
as
answer
go
these.
through?
Yeah,
Okay,
maybe
so
just
you know,
hold these.
it sort of balances it out a little bit. It's a little more accurate, I think, not to take 10 units by the fire station.
Why don't we hold that for our
Yeah.
discussion
Because
after the presentation?
I just wanted to mention that because of that one area that you're considering.
So the first focus area, again, is on Bailey Hill, Gimple Hill roads. And I know that we all talked about this a couple meetings ago. But again, the areas shown in the black stripe here, those are our first priority for expansion. The current urban growth boundary is the dotted line, and the red boundary represents kind of our expanded study area, because obviously some of these aren't contiguous to the urban growth boundary. We needed to look at how they might possibly be served, as well as where the streams continued, and just get an idea of the lay of the land. And then the other colors, so the green actually represents forest land, and the brown represents agricultural land. Moving on to,
I have
yeah.
a question, if we could. Your recommendation shows.
Wait. Can we get to the recommendation?
Oh, wait, let's
It might be easier if we hold questions to the end. Yeah, otherwise, I'll try to move through this, because I know this is a lot of the stuff you've already seen. So crest chambers, again, getting you familiar with the striped area, again, is the rural residential areas that were our first consideration for expansion. Finally, Bloomberg-McVeigh, again, striped areas, our first consideration. In addition to the extensive analysis, we also shared this information and asked for feedback from a variety of sources, including technical resource group for vetting. We shared this information with you all and got feedback that was incorporated in here. We've met with, we did the triple bottom line analysis with the subcommittees, members of the Planning Commission, Sustainability, and Human Rights Commissions. And again, I think we reported back on the property owner meetings that we held in the 3 focus areas. So throughout the comparative analysis and the stakeholder input, the common thread was that all of these study areas have some challenges for sure. With one exception, they have some pretty high infrastructure costs compared to the number of units served. They all have some topographic and natural resource constraints, and during the TBL, there wasn't one study area that just rose to the top. However, we do think there are 2 areas that best meet our needs. First is the Bailey Hill Gimple, and so the recommendation includes the 2 areas that are closest to the urban growth boundary, those 2 pockets, because they're relatively cost-effective to serve, and they would leverage investments that needed to serve the areas that are already inside the current urban growth boundary, just immediately adjacent to those properties. However, these small areas will not cover all of our housing needs, so we are recommending expanding in the Bloomberg-McVeigh area as well. This requires a small amount of intervening farm and forest land to connect to the current urban growth boundary. However, this small extension is designed also to include Bloomberg Park and an ERUB reservoir, thus minimizing the need for farm and forest lands as much as possible. So together, these 3 relatively small sites provide enough housing capacity to meet our total need. Again, so these are the 2 properties within Bailey Hill, and actually there's room for about 135 homes, so I'm off one on here. My apologies for that. As I said, these are really the most cost-effective to serve of all of the study areas we looked at, because we need to provide services inside the urban growth boundary and can leverage those investments and infrastructure to serve these small areas. There's about 60 acres here, and again, capacity for approximately 135 homes. And then second, this shows the Bloomberg-McVeigh study area. It would be everything within the black and white dotted line there. The green in the middle there is Bloomberg Park, and then to the left of that is actually an EWEB reservoir. While this study area has considerably higher infrastructure costs associated with it, it has many other unique attributes that we think are in alignment with our community values. It is the only study area that is served by transit and responds to extending the MX Bus Rapid Transit system, which strengthens the connections between this area and the rest of our community. It reaches out towards Lane Community College, which is just across 30th. Which, as we know, is a highly valued regional institution with big plans and a vital role to play in building prosperity in the region. This area has the most potential to become a complete neighborhood, as it's already includes commercial along McVeigh Highway on the east side there. It's situated between regional job centers, including the downtowns of Springfield and Eugene. It connects major streets in the region and creates possibilities for more efficient shared utilities and services. and it provides access to parks and natural areas, including our ridgeline system. In addition, in the long term, it also has a realistic potential for urban reserves. Urban reserves allow communities to plan up to 50 years of growth, which enables a longer-term, more comprehensive planning to occur. If the entire basin is eventually identified for urban reserves, it could be master planned in a way to accommodate a complete or 20-minute neighborhoods and in ways that the other study areas cannot. Planning expansion areas for 20-minute neighborhoods is a goal in the Envision Eugene recommendation under several of the pillars. We think this area has the most potential to realize that goal. This is approximately 230 acres of land and has capacity for about 400 homes. The existing commercial and industrial lands along the east side there would remain as employment lands in recognition of their existing uses on the properties. Our recommendation also includes that we pursue urban reserve planning once our 20-year urban growth boundary is established. This is an important component of the ongoing monitoring of our land supply and would provide us both flexibility and certainty for the community in our future years. We also recommend that we look at our land use regulations that would apply in these expansion areas. And this is something that we heard a lot at the property owner meetings. There are some common practices that are currently allowed by the county that would not be allowed under our current code. And we know it's going to be a little bit of time before we extend services there, so we want to allow them, allow some of those uses to continue until those properties become urbanized. We know these areas have significant natural resources, and we need to apply the same protections that we have inside the urban growth boundary on similar wetlands and streams. And then finally, we know there are transportation issues associated with these areas, either local or regional, and these will need to be addressed and coordinated with both Eugene's transportation system update and with Lane County's TSP as well. So this is a map that we shared with council that actually shows all 4 of the expansion areas. So you can see the Santa Clara Park up on the top right, and then the Clear Lake expansion area that includes the jobs, the school land, and the park land over on the upper left, and then the 2 housing proposed expansion areas, and those are all outlined in orange. Just for context, we're expecting an almost 20% increase in population over the next 20 years. And what's shown on this is that our footprint would grow by only 3.5% over that same period of time. So given current council direction and the assumptions that we're working with, we feel that this is a balanced recommendation that meets state law as well as the community's values and long-term interests. State law says that we need to find room for a growing population and spells out how that should be done. This recommendation for a small UGB expansion combines the deeply held values and attributes of our community within the rules of state law. As a community, Eugene does more than almost any other community to protect prime farm and forest lands and natural resources. We've grown responsibly and compactly for over 30 years since our first urban growth boundary was established. This recommendation holds true to that legacy while taking small steps in the right direction to provide for a growing population. So that's it.
Thank you, Alyssa.
There you go.
That was interesting.
Magic.
Okay. I have Commissioner Duncan and then Commissioner Jaworski.
On the Bailey Hill expansion, I completely understand why we're looking at that, but part of the I guess allowance by state law is intervening forest lands, and it seems to me leaving sort of that area between the expansion area and the city limits is sort of a, lack of a better term, a broken tooth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Out seems kind of odd to me because there's lands there that could be easily developable. There's small tracts, so they're really not forest lands. I mean, as far as productive forest lands, they just happen to be something left over for the zone. Why don't we kind of take that in? Because if we have to be concerned about one of the four criterion is compatibility with forest lands, this doesn't, whatever occurs there doesn't seem to be compatible with that little broken tooth area. It just, why leave some little finger stick in there and not just include it?
Can I ask a question? Can you be specific about, you're talking about the area around?
If you go back to your
BG1?
first recommendation.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it's the
other
area
way.
north of BG1.
It was
north and-
just a couple back.
Yeah, the map I got, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
just
This
so
one?
we're clear.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's a similar question.
Here, you want me to find it?
One of the ones,
I'll just.
one of the first ones.
Oh, great. Now the mouse is not.
We've all got it.
The mouse isn't working.
We all got it.
Batteries
It's this
went
one.
out.
Commissioner Baker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This map
So
here.
it's.
Yeah, no, I just
This
wanted to make
piece.
sure I was,
About the- Yeah,
Yeah.
I think what they call,
There it is.
AIS page 11.
yeah, no,
There we go.
I just wanted to make sure it was north and west of BG1 and not some other area.
yeah, that's the area I'm talking about is up there. It just seems to me that
North and
that just
Yeah.
is an omission that just creates an odd city limit line and
I
already
agree.
developed with a house, with houses, and it's kind of like, it just is not forest lands, other than it's got some F on it from somewhere in the
Right.
past.
No, I
It's in-
agree. It does create a bit of a questionable boundary, at least, from a common sense perspective. But those are designated forest lands, regardless if, how they're developed, whether or not they have trees on them. So they're not our first priority for expansion. We don't need them to extend services, and so we're not sure that they're justifiable. It's something we're looking further into, but at this point, we're trying to focus.
I understand. It just
Yeah.
seems like that's about as close to free land as we can get from a service standpoint. I mean, we're going to service.
Right. I don't.
do
I mean,
this, we service three sides of it.
Right.
It just
No,
doesn't make sense not to include it.
Get it in a presentation.
And then I guess the same question when I look at McVeigh Highway. There's, again, the little tooth at the bottom along 30th, and if I could read the color correctly, part of it's rural residential.
well, so thing to know. So that's taken from the Metro Plan, which, as you know, is not parcel specific. So we kind of had to make an interpretation of where that is. That land is actually owned by Lane Community College,
Both
and
pieces?
the piece on the. I can't do two things at once. That piece that's left out is owned by Lane Community College, and it's predominantly a wetland. So it's publicly owned, and it doesn't have much development
And then what
potential.
about
So
the sliver right on the corner of?
I
McVeigh?
actually think that is right away. It just is showing with
Oh,
a
okay.
plan designation.
Could we confirm that again so we don't just leave some strange?
Right. No, the tax lots are really what
Okay. So these
define it. What?
dotted lines go around tax lots.
Let me find the right map here. Yeah, the dotted lines are, we're actually trying to keep, with the exception of the, so you're looking at this map, the recommendation map?
Yes.
Okay. So the dotted lines go along tax lots, except for the one that's following 30th.
Okay. For some reason, I thought that piece was privately owned.
Which piece?
Oh, the little brown piece that's between the highway and the commercial zoned area.
Yeah, I believe that appears as right of way. So I
Part
think
of it
it's
is the
fattened over there.
clover leaf for the road. There's a clover leaf there that's part of the right-of-way that.
Right. We're talking about the one that's actually at 30th and McVeigh. There's a little triangle.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks. Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I have possibly a clarification and then just a question, and the question I have might be related to the two areas recommended. On the Bloomberg-McVeigh study area, in your presentation, you indicated that was 400 units, but yet when I look on page 24, if you're including both of those areas, it's 600 units.
If you have to read the note. It says,
The note below said,
note that star says the second one includes the first. It's a little confusing.
What do you mean the second one includes?
This BMC 2 also includes BMC 1.
So,
Okay, so those costs then are just related, okay, so the $65,000 costs are just all those costs related underneath, okay. Well, at the same time, then it'd be more applicable, because I didn't understand that, to go back to Bailey Hill, where you have BG1 and BG2 that you're bringing in. I was thinking you would, if you're bringing in both of those areas, you would only have one line of costs, because it seems to me that if you're going to extend water and sewer from somewhere and everything in transportation out to BG2, you have to go by BG1. So those costs wouldn't be relative, which would change the whole thing. And to me, I understand all the other criteria used to evaluate this, but at the same time, the actual infrastructure costs and related services are important. And I would have liked to have seen that. What are the costs when you look at both of those, since now you know that's your recommendation?
Okay.
Okay, and the needs in the other for a fire station, that was because this area is too far away from an existing fire station? Is that correct?
Correct. And it's not necessarily the distance, it's also the streets, the topography. So there's a number of things that goes into their analysis to
Even
look
if the
at.
streets are improved by the transportation millions put in there?
Correct.
Commissioner Borowski.
Well, my first questions from the packet were a little bit off from the residential, so Terry might want to step up for this, because it went to Steve Nystrom's letter about including the airport. Mm-hmm. And I had some concerns about that memo. When I went through it and read it about the advantages and disadvantages about bringing the airport into the UGB, a lot of the disadvantages were, if we bring the airport in, it's a lot harder to do expansions and stuff using city standards than using county standards. Mm-hmm. And to me, that sounds just awful. That we would make everybody else use city standards, but when it's something that we have to deal with, let's not do it because it's easier to use the county standards. And I think that that's just an awful, awful thing to have as a justification for not bringing it in. It's easier to use county standards to do things, so let's not bring it in. That's one thing. The other thing that jumped out at me, and I watched the city council session on this, and one of the concerns that Commissioner Brown, Councilor Brown brought up was, he was real concerned about the farmland used on Clear Lake Road for industrial and jobs lands. And one of the disadvantages that was cited in bringing the airport in was it would take the amount of needed land for industrial away from the justification, because some of those lands could be used for jobs and industrial lands, the lands that are on the airport. So if we brought the airport in, we could actually shrink the amount of industrial lands and employment lands that were needed, because we could use some of the airport lands for those jobs. So on both of those factors, I was very, very concerned by this memo and the reading that this was not a good idea to bring the airport in. I mean, the first one, as I mentioned, and the second one is, if we can reduce the amount of farmland that we're going to have to take at Clear Lake Road by bringing in the airport, obviously we're still going to have the 70-acre sites, but we might be able to take a lot of those smaller sites that are on the campus industrial side of Clear Lake Road and put those on the airport where there's needs. So I was disheartened by this memo and the conclusions that this memo made, because I read it a lot differently than the way that staff brought it up. So I just wanted to bring that to the table.
I'd like to address that. I think it's important that you look at the context of the memo, and that it's really enumerating a number of the pros and cons through a number of different categories. So not for just one of those reasons was the decision made. It's kind of the accumulation of all of the pros and cons here that led us to our recommendation. And so the fact that it's a way around city regulations, was certainly not a driving force, but it is something that we wanted to enumerate in the memo to be transparent. And regarding the industrial jobs, correct me if I'm wrong, Terry, but those lands are already providing jobs, currently. And so I don't know that we would actually be able to reduce our
But that's what it
needs.
says, right? It says that, right, in the
Oh.
in the disadvantage under the first one, legal requirements.
So I'll address that. We didn't go all the way down the road of evaluating the airport-controlled lands for industrial land need because they are publicly owned. So from the get-go, we ruled out publicly owned lands from our analysis of land that would be brought in for private employment development. So the two areas, we're bringing the UGB to the airport jurisdiction boundary, and they'll continue to operate under their master plan, and we'll operate under our UGB. But the lands that you might be talking about are along Green Hill Road, and they're identified in the airport's master plan as future industrial development, but they're still owned by the airport, and they would be probably leased to industrial hangars and those sorts of things. But I can see where that statement is confusing about not being able to count them towards our inventory or not. They're really in two different categories, public land ownership and private land for development. And then just really quick on so that kind of addresses that we wouldn't be able to shrink our expansion need. But the other reason we wouldn't be able to shrink it is that to get to those large sites, we have to take in the intervening lands.
I understand that,
Okay.
but I mean, I think some of those campus industrial lands could be put on airport lands. I mean, they're talking about putting a hotel out there on airport lands. That would be an employment, and I mean, that's a different use than a hangar. So they have lands out there that are available for other uses than hangars. And perhaps some of the campus industrial lands that are going to the south of Clear Lake Road could have been accommodated on some of the airport lands. If
They're still intervening, though. We can't exclude those from the UGB because of the location of the school property. I get your point, and it's a kind of interesting puzzle out there. And the hotel will also remain under public ownership.
Yeah, but it's still going to employ people.
It's true.
It will, and so I wonder if that's something that we can catch through our monitoring program, kind of where we are seeing the jobs and the growth, and be able to account for it that way.
I have myself in the queue. I had a question about Bloomberg McVeigh and the idea of a complete neighborhood and keeping the commercial uses in there. And I guess my question is, I'm thinking of the existing commercial uses along McVeigh and that. What's kind of the thinking on where that might go and end up? Because I don't think there's a market out there, or not terribly familiar with that area, but are you thinking it might develop into that?
It could, but I think we were thinking longer term, because I made that comment more in context with the urban reserve planning, that area has more potential for that, especially given the highway area through there. I know during the triple bottom line analysis, there was interest because there's a commercial there, although at the time, right now, it's kind of more highway strip commercial. But the fact that there's already commercial lands there, it already kind of gives it a bonus in a sense. But I think we're really thinking longer term as well.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Duncan, then Commissioner Baker.
I'm just curious, Alyssa, some of the other maps that we had when we when we started talking about expansion study areas on Bloomberg McVeigh, and referring to the fourth map in our packet, it shows quite a bit of agricultural land and then a lot of farmland, intermittent farmland in
Forest, I think.
between. Excuse me, forest.
Yeah.
Forest and ag both.
Okay.
And then yet the expansion one, and I assume you're doing this because the yellow now says this
That
is
would
what
be
it needs.
low density, right?
I guess it seems to me that that's quite a bit of ag and forest land that's in between that we're trying to pull in so that we can connect this. And I'm going to go back to this one. This seems like a whole lot less land up here that we would tag in. Now, I understand what we're doing is we're trying to get our carry stem out here so it connects, but it seems like when we look at compact urban growth, kind of reaching way out there and create this arm with a hand at the end seems very odd to me, when here it would actually make a very reasonable and appropriate redevelopment of our city limit lines. It's already an odd jog we've got sitting here anyways, and this just ties it in where Bloomberg Bay sort of looks like a strange reach to me.
What's that for services?
Well, you have to connect it. You have to connect it to urban growth boundary.
No, I know, but I mean, part of the reasoning for that, too. Yeah, okay.
You
You're
have
right.
to just connect.
You've got to connect it.
Right. I mean,
Well,
it's
have an island.
right. So so the Bloomberg McVeigh. We think that's the minimal amount to provide a connection, and then some of that actually has services going through it. So for those two reasons, that's why that boundary is drawn that way in the Bloomberg McVeigh area. I completely understand what you're saying about the Bailey Hill, Gimple Hill. We wish the law was a little bit more logical. We'll continue to look at whether or not we think we can justify. But as I said, it's not needed to connect that area to the urban growth boundary or to provide services to it.
Those are the two criteria
Yeah.
you need in order to take in intervening.
I'm sorry, what?
You need it to become contiguous to the UGB, or you need it to provide services to the exception area. And our original recommendation was to include those, and our attorneys really said, we don't think you can justify that because you can't meet those two criteria.
How many units are we talking about if we brought in that? We must
Like
be
in the-
talking 40 units?
30, I think it is. Yeah.
Basically got rounded.
Could you describe on the map where you're talking about?
Back to
The Bailey Gimple.
The little missing tooth. I was comparing,
Bloomberg McVeigh now? Bloomberg McVeigh?
I was comparing the way Bloomberg McVeigh, if you look at the expansion map.
You're talking about BG1 north and east
Yeah.
of BG1.
It just seems,
So these devices right here, so our recommendation is to bring in this piece right here.
and my point is if you look at how small that is, and then you go to Bloomberg McVeigh map, if we could have that.
Give me a minute to. Can you get there? No. We're waiting for the mouse to.
Okay.
The mouse is out of batteries.
I wish there was a way to. Oh, great.
Okay, it's a solar powered mouse.
Here we go.
Here.
Mouse is alive.
All right. Thanks. So technical difficulties. Let's go to
My point was that if you look at this little piece up here,
crying out loud.
it seems odd to leave that out of, because it can't be forest land compatible. You've got residential that's going to be all the way around it. And then if you go to McVeigh for me, we're talking about extending all the way up through here, including all of this, and yet we're doing that, which is ag and forest, but on the other side, we're not taking what seems to be the most reasonable piece to join in it. And I know what staff is saying, that we have to extend way out here and include all that to get services out here.
And to be contiguous.
And to be
What I'm hearing is you need that to be contiguous, and so then
But
it's
it's a long
okay.
stretch.
You need
Well, but
both
it-
of them, though.
But what I'm hearing is,
To be legally justified.
yeah, I
No,
guess
you
that's
don't
what
need
I'm
both. You
hearing
need
is
one or
with,
the other.
So what's the attorney?
This one has both.
What's the attorney?
The other one has
balking at?
neither.
Well, the other one doesn't have either. So this one, obviously, you need it to get contiguous, and then
Stretch.
yeah.
Bailey Hill, it already adjoins the UGB. It doesn't need that piece.
And services will be. I'm going to go to this.
and so because it already adjoins, you can't take in that piece justifying that because you're making it contiguous. It's a thing in the state law that
It
is what I'm
doesn't-
hearing.
It is, and
It's-
we totally agree.
Yeah, and it's
It's-
frustrating that that
yeah.
piece is designated forest when it has the same characteristics. I mean, you look at an aerial photo, you look anything, the parcel size is the same, the development pattern's the same, but because it's designated forest.
And I guess I would somewhat disagree with our city attorney on that, is I think we can make enough case that it's reasonable to include that because of consistency with our city limits and everything else. mean, I've read enough of this you guys have been teaching me a lot in the last decade about this stuff, and I think there's enough gray there that allows little pieces like that to be brought in. I mean, you're only talking 40 units total, so you could, I mean, that's not much.
It's,
And it just seems to me that we're talking about bringing quite a bit of forest and ag land in the other way, and yet this one seems to be a more reasonable place. Plus, I believe it's probably, when you look at the two, it's probably got a more likelihood of being something developed on it, actually get housing on it, versus if you look at that McVeigh stretch, there's a lot of not very good land that we're connecting to McVeigh up along 30th. It's not really good developable land. But again, I understand the state law, but I think you can push the issues a little bit. It makes sense.
So would, just to clarify, this would be in addition to, not instead of the Bloomberg McVeigh, right? Because there's not enough room here to
Oh, no, I just,
make up for that. Okay.
yeah. I mean, partly is because we're going to have to service this whole thing anyway. That 40 units gets to be almost free to be able to do that. And it seems to me as a community, we can look at the economics through the ECs and say, this one makes sense from an economic standpoint, that we're going to get it for almost free. That seems like a good thing, because I think a lot of what bothers me some is that it's very costly to do this, and the community as a whole is going to pick up all of these costs that we see in these charts. You know, these costs are going to be shared by everybody out there through SDC charges. They're not going to be shared by just the development that occurs in these little pockets. So if we can get a better bang for our buck, it seems to me that's good evidence.
well, we can continue to evaluate kind of the legal risk and including those, because I definitely agree with you and understand the perspective there. So we'll continue to look at that. Yeah.
I have Commissioner Baker and Borofsky in the queue, and I also want to make sure I leave enough time for Carolyn's presentation. So we're a little past our scheduled time. So Carolyn's was scheduled at 12:15. So maybe Commissioner Baker and Commissioner Borofsky, and then I don't know if Commissioners Taylor or Mills have any comments. So go ahead.
I have a bunch of questions, concerns. I'll start with a comment just on Commissioner Duncan's point. I think it's an interesting point. However, I would point out that if you're justifying bringing in that tooth, then you probably end up bringing in the other tooth next to the due west to the expansion, because again, the property that's left, if I could get up here.
East.
Yeah, east. So you bring in this, then this property here is, from here,
You got my vote.
this property here is surrounded on three sides by resident. In other
You
words,
got my vote.
I know, but the point is, you got to decide where you got to, So if you were using that justification, you would probably end up bringing in that whole piece of property, because it would end up being surrounded on three sides by residential, no matter what. So again, I'm not saying that I'm in favor of that, but if we're considering that, that probably makes more sense than just the one piece. Now, I'm going to go back to a few other things that I can't quite understand. And I had hoped it would be, when we had talked last time, I was hoping for some more detail on the crest chambers than we have the same that we had before, because it seems to me that obviously on the stuff on the, I would describe it on the north side of Crest Drive in CC1, it seems to me would come in a lot cheaper than it is on maybe on the south side, because of some issues with servicing for drainage and water or whatever. But I'm trying to figure out, I'm going to go through a few areas here. Crest Drive comes in at $44,000 per unit, and we have a total of 532 potential units to bring in there. We only really need, if we assume that we're bringing in Bailey Hill first, we've already brought in 130 some units, and so we need another 370 or something like that. I mean, again, so there's certainly capability to deal with it here. And looking at the costs, it just seems to me that we don't have to do these fingers out like we have to do in Bay, take in a whole bunch of area that is not appropriate really to bring in, but we have to because it needs to be contiguous. And this area is already serviced by transportation. So I need some discussion. I'm going to mention a bunch of things, and then we'll come. Hopefully, you can come back to it. Why this area was rejected, given that it's such a low cost per unit.
Yeah.
Also, I'm going to mention simpler things first. Again, looking at the Crow Road, not that I'm an advocate for that area necessarily, but if you combine CR1 and CR2, the cost per unit becomes $94,000, which is also less expensive than BMC1, the Bloomberg-McVeigh area. And I'm also confused by the numbers in Bloomberg-McVeigh. For example, when you combine the two together, there's one fire station for the both of them. I understand that. That makes sense. But you're showing the same total cost for water for 400 units as there are for 200 units. That doesn't, we don't see that anywhere else in these tables. So I'm trying to figure out, that means that the cost to bring in the extra 200 units of BMC2 is zero. That just doesn't seem right to me.
I think it's because you have to extend the services out.
I can answer that, but I'll wait till you get through all your questions.
So
There's actually a really
I need the clarification.
easy answer for that one.
So there's the question there about that, and then there's a question, and also I wanted to discuss the issue with transportation access for Bloomberg-McVeigh. There is good transportation access to Lane Community College. You look at the map, if you look at our maps here, the access to Lane Community College comes down the road, and it goes to the college where the bus station is. Without them adding, and they turn in now at the ramp, they turn in now at the ramp here for Lane Community College. They turn in and come into the college campus. So they come in sort of at the cloverleaf. That's the primary bus transit to that area. There happens to be a bus that's very infrequent that goes down, I think it goes down along McVeigh Highway, but that's a very infrequent bus because there's not a lot of traffic generated in that area. So if we did a measurement of how far it is for someone living in this new area to get to a bus, if we're talking about BMC1, which is the area I think you're primarily considering that would be the area developed, not BMC2, that's really more of a connection. Are we talking at about a mile? Is it a mile and a half by foot? And there's no sidewalks. There's nothing there to get you over to where the transit is, which is over here on 30th Avenue. So something is not being factored in, from my point of view. I just think that it's.
I think Carolyn has a response.
Right.
I do want to keep this moving so that we don't
Right.
lose her presentation.
So I think that's how many? Five?
I got 5 out of
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So quickly, let's see. The first question was with Crest and the costs. I would first. I just wanted to say that.
Which is about half of Bloomberg-McVeigh per unit.
Well, but you would have to, again, with Bloomberg-McVeigh, we were able to divide the total cost by 400, which is the capacity that we would actually need Bloomberg to fulfill, which would be about $65,000 per unit. Same thing with Crest Chambers. If we looked at spreading that across the 400 units that would actually be needed, the cost would be about $60,000 per unit. So yes, cheaper, but not considerably cheaper. And I guess I would say we didn't make our decision wholly based on price. We looked at trying to be as cost effective as possible, but also look at some of the other tangible pros and cons of the area. And so for that reason, we didn't think that $5,000 per unit was enough to sway us. So Then the second question you had an
Well,
answer to.
yeah. So on Crest Chambers, you asked about the properties that are north of Crest and why wouldn't that be cheaper? And I think Matt explained this last time. You can see that there's a stream going through the middle of those tax lots, which means that there would have to be, the wastewater would actually have to run on both sides, because ideally it would run at the lowest points between those properties, but that happens to be where the stream would be and the wetlands. So there would have to be double lines in this area. It gets to be fairly expensive. It's also more difficult for fire to serve. So what we have, that CC1 is actually a combination of where fire could serve plus where it's cheapest, or least expensive, I should say, for wastewater. So that's kind of an overlapping of those two boundaries. I'm going to jump to Crow, and you had mentioned that the CR1 and CR2. I will, as I noted in my presentation, this is the only area, you can see this has the most farmland surrounding it, and there's actually active farming occurring between CR1 and CR2, and that's really one of the reasons why we did not find this area particularly attractive. In terms of Bloomberg McVeigh, the areas that are closest to the urban growth boundary, there's actually a water line that goes through there, so it doesn't cost any more to serve those properties. They're not currently receiving service. It's the line that goes, actually some of them are, but it's the line that goes, kind of goes along 30th in a sense, and it can easily provide service to those properties that would make this area contiguous to the urban growth boundary. So that's why there's no additional cost on there.
That would,
And then with regards
if I
to
could just
transit.
comment.
Okay, Commissioner Baker, we're way over time,
Right.
and I've got 3 other commissioners in the queue, and I really want to make sure that Carolyn has an opportunity to present her presentation to us, so I'd like to move on.
And I had one more of his
one more.
questions to
Okay.
answer regarding transit for the
Okay.
Bloomberg McVeigh area. What we find, and in talking to LTD, this area has the potential to be served by transit, whereas the other areas do not. So there is not only the bus that serves LCC, there is a bus that comes down McVeigh. As this area develops, those service times can be increased. Those routes can be rerouted. We think that there is much greater potential for this whole basin to be served by transit in the future than any of the others. And so it's not maybe what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years, but it's that long-term future potential that we're really looking at and that we were basing our recommendation on.
I have Commissioner Borofsky, then Commissioner Taylor, then Commissioner Mills, and we're almost a half hour into Carolyn's.
And I'm just going to make kind of a comment, not a real question, regarding some of the things that have been brought up here today about reaching, across and hitting the UGB. If we use that realization or rationalization, I think that the DAG Trust could also follow that same rationalization. And in my view, I know it's probably not going to happen, but a lot of the arguments that Mr. Reeder brought up and that I've seen in the thing make a lot of sense. It seems like a really appropriate piece of property for the UGB. Now, that being said, I don't think that it's going to make it. I watched the city council, and John kind of reined in Commissioner Poling when he started bringing this up and said, I'll need a motion for this, and none was granted. So I just think that if the city is going to start spending its legal capital to bring in this tooth here and that tooth there, they could just as easily spend that legal capital to try and bring in the DAG Trust. And I think that would make a lot more. If you're going to go that way, that's the piece of property that I would like to see them do that on. And that's just a comment that I would like to make.
Robin?
Yeah, I totally understand when you look at the presentation that Mr. Reeder gave and when you look at the concept plan that they've advanced for that area, it's easy to envision that as an area that creates a complete community, and I think that's part of the reason that they're recommending it. The challenge is that if you try to make an argument to take in a piece of resource land when your purpose is to take in that piece of resource land, that's a much different argument to make than just connecting exception lands. And I think that's where we get hung up. If you look at the exception lands just out south of the property there, Willow Creek is actually the closest connection. There's a couple of really small pieces of forest land that connect the exception lands to the UGB. And if you were to make the argument, well, we need to connect these, we're going to go in those exception lands. They are the most expensive ones that we've looked at. And you want to connect those to UGB, those would be the pieces you would take in, not the big piece to the north. And it's, when you look at it, it's pretty clear that that's what you would do. So, yeah, it's just hard to make that argument.
Commissioner Taylor.
Actually, I was going to say something comparable to what Commissioner Borowski was saying, and that is because we do have continued testimony and input that's fairly substantial. I do think that level of explanation, at least publicly, and some of the other arguments that are being presented for Bloomberg McVeigh, for instance, about MX and the extension and creating communities, I really think it would behoove staff to actually represent those findings for some of those, especially for properties that are being brought up in the same context. Because just to dismiss it, because I just looked at MX, for instance, LTD. MX is going to go as far as Beltline, and there already is LTD service that actually continues to Bonita. So some of those arguments are equal. Now, are they truly equal? That's what you'd be looking at. So I think the evaluation, just because we have had a level of testimony, rather than ignoring it, really trying to provide some findings that actually justify a decision more than what Alyssa presented, which is just there's ag land and forest land. Well, Bloomberg McVeigh has the same. Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and that's valid. It's just that I think at some point it needs to be addressed.
Okay.
Commissioner Mills.
Just as a continuation of what Kirsten just said, and that is, I feel like there's been a body of work done here that's not yet presented in documentation. In other words, you all have given this a lot of very serious consideration. There's still a lot of questions to answer. But we've talked about, we're about to hear a presentation about pro and cons about one particular topic. It seems like a similar type of pros and cons analysis or table listing of salient issues associated with each property and why it's being recommended in or out. I think that there's value in that, especially we have the public forum going. We're going to have more presentations on this. People are going to have a lot of questions. It seems like there needs to be another document here that talks about more than just the maps and the dollars. And because there's a lot of other strategic issues like transportation and growth patterns and how you want, why we're choosing here versus there. Mm-hmm. So I'd suggest that there be some more written presentation on that.
I'm thinking a memo that maybe clearly outlines the legal justification is maybe we're looking at two different sets of criteria. Number one is we need to be able to justify it within the state of Oregon. If we can do that, then we can look at the other criteria, which are kind of MX and livability. And so I think first we need to clarify what is legally justifiable. And I think we feel like we've done that, but I think we can provide something written, maybe from our attorneys, that help to describe that. And then I think your other question is more, once you've cleared that hurdle, how do we compare these other sites?
Well, yeah, I'm not my intent wasn't to back you up to the legal portion of it. I'm not dismissing that question, but I'm more interested in some of the things that are coming about through Commissioner Baker's questions, for example, about why this and not that. And you have answers. Mm-hmm. You've looked at this, and I think it just needs to be summarized in some manner.
A little more detailed that it was too expensive.
Yeah.
This is why it was too expensive, because there's a stream. The stuff that you guys know, but it isn't quite here yet.
Okay.
Commissioner Jaworski has.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, actually, almost that last comment. I think the staff did an admirable job, from what I understand, of what they had to look at, the processes and whatever. But where I think it falls short is that when you start to look at the costs associated with that, there's not enough, for me, a delineation of what that means. I can look at all these various maps, but when I look at Bloomberg McVeigh and I go, millions being spent for the highway, and I see, wow, 30th Street looks pretty good, so it's only those little feeders up? I mean, why is it 5-point-something million? Does the college out there have its own fire station, and does it have its own water supply? I don't know that, because if it, and if it doesn't have its own fire station, it seems to me that all those kids should have deserved, if they're in the same proximity, these are the kinds of questions that I don't understand, because it seems to me that when you look at all your other criteria, we come down to the bottom line. This is cheaper than that, and I don't have enough delineation to really know if it's cheaper than that, is what I'm saying. That's all I have to say.
Okay. So it sounds like a little more maybe pro and con information, and that might be helpful, is what I'm hearing. And Carolyn, do you have enough time for your presentation?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I don't have a PowerPoint. We're just going to talk through this.
Okay. And okay, Commissioner Baker has one, I hope, short comment.
Yeah, no, I just think that, we should have enough time to discuss these issues. These are important issues. And, and if she needs more time, or if we need more time, then we need to make that time available. I don't like the concept of you're on a schedule and either when you just cut it off and that's it. There's some important issues here that I think would be valuable in making a presentation to the public in these forums and making them more useful for the public understanding.
So, in your packet, you had a diagram, attachment A, which I think I'll just kind of talk about to begin with. This isn't exactly a new concept. We've talked about the kind of structure of the Envision Eugene plan in the past. This is a new diagram that I'll just explain to kind of get our heads in the game. But the idea here is that there are 4 components to the Envision Eugene documentation. The first component is really telling the story about the community vision. There's no kind of regulatory teeth to it. That comes later, but this is kind of explaining the process and telling people what it is that this community vision for our future looks like. That's where the pillars come in. That's where the goals come in. There's a lot of similarity, actually, with the 2012 recommendation. The second component would be the actual comprehensive plan. That is the regulatory kind of teeth in this document. That is what we're required to do by the state of Oregon. This is a regulatory plan, and in that it needs to contain goals and policies for all of the different land use chapters. Also within that comprehensive plan would be a land use diagram. So we would no longer need to look to the Metro Plan for our land use diagram. That will be in the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan, and as well as a number of appendices that are actually required by law. And I'll talk about those a little bit more in a second. The third component or volume is looking at our urban form, and that is really kind of taking the vision and explaining what that means physically on the ground. So the vision at this point is pretty broad, right? We have concepts about economic prosperity, about housing affordability, but we don't know necessarily what that looks like on the ground. This, in large part, is the community design guide, which you have already spent some time looking at. I think we're renaming that the community design handbook at this point. So people like that term a little bit better than guide. And we are doing some ongoing work on that, and we'll be bringing that to you in the future. And then the fourth component is the implementation plan, and this doesn't only tell us what actions we need to do in order to reach our goals and our pillars, but it also contains in it how we will monitor and keep this work up to date, and then be able to make adjustments as we go. So these four components together, they should be able to work individually on their own, but you need all four to get the full picture of what we're doing. So if you flip to the other side, it just talks a little bit more about what is in it's almost like a table of contents for each of the different components. So again, we have the four plans, or the four volumes across the top. Each one will have an introduction and kind of help ground the reader in how this particular component relates to the complete plan. Talk about how to use this plan. Under the community vision, we will talk about where we are today, what our demographics are, what are our economic situations, what are the issues that we're trying to address in this community vision. We'll talk a little bit about best outcomes, because we've talked a lot about best outcomes throughout the whole process. And then this volume will really kind of stay at the pillar level, so describing what's the issue that we're trying to address with each one of these pillars, why does it matter, and what is the vision, what are we trying to achieve with that pillar. Then moving on to the comprehensive plan, it's important. The comprehensive plan will not be organized by pillar, because that's not how state law is organized. But we will have a crosswalk which shows how the pillars and the different chapters of the plan organized by state law will be related. Then, of course, we'll have our goals and policies. We do have a set of the economic development policies for you to review. We will be bringing the other policies to you as they're ready, and so we'll kind of be putting this thing together in segments or increments. As I said, our comprehensive plan map and designations, and Heather will be... and Heather is here to talk a little bit about our plan for bringing that to you. And then also within the comp plan will be things like our employment opportunities analysis, our housing needs analysis. These are the documents that actually justify our land need, and so these have to be adopted as part of Envision Eugene, and so they will be adopted as appendices to the comp plan. This comp plan is the one section of the 4-volume set that will be adopted by ordinance. We're still kind of playing with what the mechanism will be for council to accept or authorize these other 3 components, but we know that the comprehensive plan does have to be adopted by ordinance. I won't spend a lot of time on the urban form component, because that's a little bit following a different track, but we will be bringing information to you on that. And as I said, the Community Design Handbook kind of forms the basis of that. Then the implementation volume, I actually have a little excerpt that I'll hand out, because I think it'll be helpful to provide this. But this is where we actually get into the action items. How are we going to implement these goals? What are the actions that the city needs to take over time in order to make this a reality? These are things that we don't necessarily want in our comprehensive plan. They're not necessarily land use regulations. They're more action items. And so this is where these are documented. And then the monitoring plan. And Heather has talked to you about the monitoring plan and where we are with that. And we'll be bringing our next iteration of that to you in the probably coming weeks or months. So the reason I wanted to hand this out to you is because these action items do really work in coordination with the policies that are in Chapter 2. And so, Volume 2, the comprehensive plan. And so these are the actions that would help to implement economic development, economic prosperity. And I thought once I had sent the policies out to you, I realized, they might think that we're missing some things. We're not missing them. We just didn't think they would needed to be in the regulatory component of the plan. They need to be in the action component of the plan. So wanted to provide those to you. So if you turn to attachment B, page 1, this talks a little bit more about the table of contents for the comprehensive plan. The items that are in yellow are those that we do hope to accomplish as part of this round of Envision Eugene adoption. We are required to have policies around economic development and housing. Some of our urbanization policies will be required in relation to multifamily housing, as well as school siting and planning. Because we are expanding for schools, we think that will be required. Transportation will be addressed actually by reference because the TSP will be updated fairly parallel with Envision Eugene. So the TSP will not be a chapter in the comprehensive plan, but we will refer to it as addressing our transportation policies. And then Chapter 9 is kind of how we administer this plan. And that actually, a lot of that work has been done in the work that you all did with the Metro Plan amendments, where we kind of talked about how the Metro Plan will evolve over time and how it will be supplanted with each city's comprehensive plans. So I guess I invite Heather up to tell us a little bit about what to expect with the plan diagram, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the economic development policies.
Great. Good afternoon. So as Carolyn mentioned, as you know, the Metro Plan, our current comp plan, has the land use diagram, fondly referred to as the blob diagram, because it is kind of blobby in nature as far as where our land use designations fall on the map. It's not tax lot or what we call parcel specific. It's not at that level of detail. And so our goal is to take this map, the Eugene side of it, and make it parcel specific. A lot of jurisdictions already do that. There's some really great reasons to do that. The first one, or one of them, is that there are some things that are going to be required to be parcel specific when we adopt our urban growth boundary, and one of those things is the urban growth boundary line is going to be required to be parcel specific, so we'll have that on our map. Anywhere that we're expanding the urban growth boundary, so those expansion areas will have new land use designations. Those have to be parcel specific. And then there are some lands that are already parcel specific on this diagram. It's just hard to tell because of the scale. And those are ones where we have changed the designation of a property. So for instance, you all looked at the redesignations we did as part of Envision Eugene for the Crow Road area, Gillum Road, the Irving Road site. Those are all parcel specific now. So those are a couple of reasons. Other reasons is that it will actually bring more clarity to property owners as well as neighboring properties to kind of understand how their property and properties around them can be used in the future. And additionally, Carolyn mentioned monitoring. It will make it a lot easier to track our buildable lands inventory in the future. So what we have been doing is we've been working with a number of interns, which has been really great. And what they've been doing is helping us clarify or rectify some of the graphical errors that occur when you take a map that's 11 by 17 and you blow it up to be or enlarge it to be at a lot specific level. There's a lot of kind of graphical errors that start to occur bringing it to that scale. So they've been helping us look at cleaning those up. The interns as well as staff have been researching previous land use approvals. So again, where redesignations have happened, we've already those lots are parcel specific to whatever their new designation was changed to. And then any zone changes that have happened, we obviously made a call at that point what the plan designation is, because you have to be consistent with that when you change your zone. So those are good indicators for that we want to incorporate into the diagram. Once we have a draft document, then the next things we need to do is a pretty extensive outreach effort. We'll need to talk to any property owners where there might be a question. So if your property is near two different land use designations, we're obviously making a call on what the designation of your property is. So we want to reach out to those folks in neighborhoods. And this is all really to try to just get a parcel to take this and make it tax lot specific. At this point, we're not addressing things like where we've got a plan and a zone conflict, which one's right, what should be cleaned up, kind of bigger picture questions. This will give us the foundation to be able to do that work in the future. So at this point, it's really just about I say just, but is about getting this to a parcel level for adoption with the UGB package.
So, thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
I just, before I turn it over and stop talking and let you all talk, wanted to just say a couple things actually about the policies that we have included, the economic development policies. These, after each kind of heading, there is the citing of the OAR that that particular policy is addressing. We were very, very kind of thoughtful about what should be a policy, what should be an action item. We wanted to make sure that we had a complete set of policies around economic development, but that we weren't layering too many policies into this regulatory document, because it just can become a little bit unwieldy. And so I think it's important to remember that the policies work in coordination with the pillars, the goals, the strategies, and the actions. And together that kind of forms our complete strategy towards economic development in the community. So welcome your comments about this. This is really just kind of a pilot or a template for how we will put this together and address all of the other different components. Anything I missed, Terry, that you would add on?
I think I would just add that I told you when I gave you the recommendation for jobs that we would bring back the policy package. So this is a necessary component to adopt the UGB and tie the dots together. So you'll see things like targeted industries as a policy, and that is the policy support for what we're proposing for the UGB expansion. It all kind of links back to this.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Thank you. I have Commissioner Borowski in the queue first.
A couple of comments. I guess I'll go to the map first because I didn't see that in the packet, so that brought up some questions. And one of the key questions that I would have on that is, again, the notification and the outreach and the appeal. How is that going to go? If you reach out to a property owner, send them a postcard and say, you're in a blob and it could be this and it could be that, and they don't respond and it gets designated one way, and then 5 years down the road they decide, no, I wanted it that way. Is there going to be some sort of a flexibility that those border blob properties might be able to use either one going forward? I don't know. That's just a comment that I think will need quite a bit of flushing out, because I can see that as a very appealable issue. But going to these policies, in Section 2, Carolyn, I see where they grew out of. They grew out of Envision Eugene. And I'm talking specifically on page 11 about the flexibility and protection of existing businesses. And that refers back to a couple other policies that directly, in my view, directly align with Envision Eugene. You know, how are we going to grow? Okay, we're going to grow along corridors. How are we going to maintain these lands? But when I read flexibility and protection of existing businesses, I see that as a citywide type of a goal, because I think that as a business owner who isn't in the downtown or isn't in one of these corridors, those are businesses that we need to be protecting and encouraging as well. And so when you refer back and say, okay, we're going to protect West 11th, type of thing, and we're going to do that, and that checks off that box for existing businesses. I think to get the whole community to buy, when Envision Eugene was put out there, how are we going to grow? Where do you want to go? How do you want to do it? That's great. But we're just using Envision Eugene as the only scope to look through for I don't want us to use Envision Eugene as the only scope to look through as how are we going to grow economically and prosperity. We've got to protect the businesses that are here and encourage the businesses that are here that aren't necessarily on a corridor. Because the majority of the businesses in Eugene don't fall into those places right now. We want to grow along those areas, but we also have to continue to enhance the businesses and the economy throughout the whole city. Otherwise, when you try and reach out for incentives along those corridors, you're going to get blowback. It's like, well, why does he get 10 years tax reduction and I'm 3 blocks over and I'm paying for that stuff? So we need to look citywide, because I don't want that blowback. I do want us to grow that way, but we have to look as a citywide. So when I read that and I said, okay, see those 2 land policies, and it was parcel assemblies and it was West Eugene area.
Right.
It didn't quite cover it for me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And this may be an example where we say that these policies aren't the only, do not summarize our entire economic development strategy. For instance, there are, and I just gave this to you today, so you haven't had a chance to look at it, but there are action items that do address that in here. And it's also important, these are built on the economic prosperity, what's the name of that plan?
The Regional Economic Prosperity Plan?
Yes.
Sure.
Which is really our plan for economic prosperity. These policies are really kind of focused on the land use components of that, but it's a good comment, and we might think about how we can integrate those all a little bit more.
Mr. Baker.
Yeah, a couple of quick observations. There's a couple places where you say, like, preserve, encourage and preserve the creation of affordable neighborhoods. I think the pillar really was enhance rather than preserve.
Can you tell me where you are?
Page, I guess it's page 44 on the AIS, policy 2.33. Actually, just backing up a couple of points, it just seems to me that there are more places where you could, following up on what Commissioner Borofsky stated, that we're trying to support existing businesses, housing, whatever here, and so you need to make a strong case for doing that, which in some cases is enhancing existing economic, commercial areas, residential areas. It's also protection. We have a whole bunch of changes going on and where we're putting multifamily, so we need to have protections for existing neighborhoods that are adjacent or areas adjacent to some of these other urban developments. And also, I'll mention it here because it's actually touched on briefly here with your list of where you talk about energy in Goal 6. You should make it clear in the document that, buildings are responsible for the majority of all energy use in the U.S., something between 40 and 45%. So obviously, it shows the importance of the layout of the building, on ultimate energy use in some cases. So we need to that needs to be mentioned under housing and under economic development. We'd like sites to be developed in a way so that there is solar access, if that's deemed to be an important issue in the single-family residential areas.
Commissioner, where you were saying Goal 6, I'm not sure.
I think he's on page 38.
I skipped over to 38, where we have
Energy
chapters.
conservation.
We have 6, and you have 3, and you have 2. But the point is, some of these things need to cross over more, from my point of view, and energy is one of those because buildings are such a large component of energy use. In fact, I think the AIA has adopted a policy of, 2030, or is it 2040 now?
One of the two, I don't remember.
Yeah, buildings would be energy neutral by 2040. Well, obviously, siting has a big impact on that. So we would like to make sure that, when these properties do get developed, that if possible, buildings are sited or, subdivisions are laid out in these new residential areas, or when parcels are reparceled, that it's done in a way that would facilitate energy efficiency. So, and then again, to me, the importance of that one pillar about enhance livability in existing areas, which would include economic sites that may not be right on our corridors. It also includes residential areas that may be adjacent, that are established, that we want to not just preserve, but enhance. So those are the things that jumped out at me that I wanted to mention about this document. And I have one quick comment that I'll throw in that's unrelated. I think the first half of the talk, I think it would be better if you didn't combine the stars. In other words, if you don't have some BMC 1 and 2 combined, everything else is separate, and then you have a total. And I think it would be less confusing to the public if that was the way for all of them, just from a presentation standpoint.
Well, the way that those study areas were actually compiled was looking at the costs of infrastructure to serve. And so
I don't want to we can talk about that.
Yeah, we are restricted in how we can organize that. So I understand that it's not exactly consistent throughout, but there are reasons for why it is
right. But it seems to me that from a community, from not only were there two commissioners confused, how many people in the public will be confused by it as well. So if there's a way of unifying it, even that's all I was saying.
Okay.
That for the public workshops, it'd be less confusing to the public if they were consistent. That's all.
Commissioner Taylor.
Well, thank you for the great overview. I think it's going in a great direction. I have two questions. One, I did notice the same in referring to the land supply that Commissioner Borofsky brought up. Mm-hmm. I like the idea of generally having a policy that actually reflects on both those areas for downtown key transit corridors and core commercial areas. So to explore that, not just focus on industrial, for instance. The other is a question. So is there a reason why in implementation strategies and actions, you've done a good job in terms of bridging pillars to policies that are OAR, state required, and then when we get to strategies, that connection is lost in terms of which goal or pillars. I just was wondering, was there an intention around that, or to add more flexibility? Because if there isn't, I like the idea of continuing that Strategy 1 really addresses Goal 1 and Goal 2. And I'm not sure if that was intentional, like I said, or not.
It was. The way we first organized the policies, actually, was to have policies implementing individual goals. And I liked that, too, because it's just, it's simple, it's easy to track what you're trying to accomplish. What we found is that so many of the policies actually implement more than one goal.
Yeah.
And similar, actually, with the strategies and actions, what is good for business development oftentimes is good for household prosperity. And so we just had a hard time separating them out. And so it was, we struggled with that a lot, and this was the way that it ended.
Makes sense.
Commissioner Mills.
Good work, great start. I applaud you for your new terms section where I've repeatedly asked for what does this mean, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I see you've laid this out here and started to take a run at.
We're starting.
I understand, because there's some of these that are filled in, but I, for example, I love what you've done with the term industry cluster. It adds a lot of clarity, and I'd encourage you to do the same thing with a lot of these other ones, which have vague meanings to me, and I'm sure I'm not exceptional at things like advanced manufacturing, advanced materials, advanced technology, clean technology. Those are all interspersed through here, and I think that some of those are not yet in this glossary, and I'd encourage you to include them. But a great start, and I really appreciate that you're moving in that direction. So it'll help us a great deal. And then I had just a question about how to understand and that as I read this, I'm having a difficulty understanding, and I'm going to mention two of them. Policy 2.6, industry clusters, which you do define, but then you say develop networks among associated targeted industry clusters for innovative networking, information sharing, and so on. And so I'm not sure if you're talking about infrastructure here, develop networks. And then similarly, very much along the same line, you go to infrastructure, 2.29, technological support, acquire technological systems, both current and as needed in the future, as a means to accelerate high-tech firm development. Those, and I'm not suggesting that they're redundant, they may support one another, but as you said, you've got to start here, but there's some more thought to be given how best to describe some of this. So
Appreciate that.
just those comments, other than that, just want to compliment you again on the start.
Thanks. Terry, when we talk about developed networks under 2.6,
I could.
I'm thinking that's not infrastructure.
Right, it's actually social, people networks.
Then I would
Yeah.
encourage us to say that,
Okay.
because an engineer reads it, or a
Right.
technical person reads it, they're going to put in Wi-Fi, or they're going to put in
And
high-speed.
so I realized, as I said it, even social network doesn't really mean people, does it?
Not necessarily,
It was
no.
great you
Right.
brought that up, because I went to an assumption, and I
So I think, once again, there's more work to be done here. I'd also offer, any help that we can make or I can make. I'd be pleased to help with this, but just
There'll be
great
ample
start.
opportunities for that, so thank you.
I'd appreciate the opportunity to help.
Yeah.
Commissioner Duncan.
Yeah, I'd like to just piggyback on with Commissioner Borowski on the map. I think that's going to be an enormous job.
It already has.
Really happy to see that you're going to take that on.
That's good.
Me too.
When we look at our blob map, you're going to find more conflicts.
Oh, yeah.
I think we know, since we know that blob line is somewhere, 150 feet wide, and believe me, everybody's going to want to have the higher value land as far as what their zoning is, so look at that. And then back to the economic development. I was a little confused when I went through it, and we went from sort of the economic development objectives to targeted industries, and I know we use that term. And then the next is land supply, and we start talking about industrial lands. And our target industries don't necessarily go on industrial lands. And I'm not sure that to a certain extent, we don't mean Now I'm going to have to use another term that we've already used for zoning, employment lands. Is it commercial, is it industrial, is it employment? What is it exactly? And I think it's all of the above. And I think that's what this document needs to really reflect, because a lot of the work we did like on West 11th was to help merge the industrial and commercials into a more unified employment type land. And I think that's actually what we're looking for here. It's not just industrial lands, it's all of our lands to make them work better for economic prosperity. And I think that's real important that we, at least I believe that's what you're getting at here. Because like I said, I got confused. I went from target industrial to industrial lands, and it was like, I don't think that's really what we want. So, I mean, I guess I'd like to see sort of more thought about how we talk about those lands, because I think that's what we're after, if I'm not mistaken, by reading through all this. And I have to agree, I think it's a wonderful start.
Some of it is by virtue of the language in the OARs. So there's an OAR that talks about short-term industrial land supply, for example, and so we need to have a policy that addresses that. But I think some more explanation about our overall strategy would be helpful up front, and then how the terms are interchangeable or not.
Well, and I think, too, again, when we go back, and unfortunately we're stuck with the OARs and so on, but I think the OARs really intended to really be employment land, not just industrial land, although it does call out industrial. But we've moved away, our culture has moved away from industrial being our employment lands, and our business lands, or our incubation lands. We're using a lot of different places now for business.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sort of old terms that we're stuck with. And we can redefine them, I'm sure, or at least explain what we mean, even if we have to use the state's definitions of things for discussion.
Right. That'll take a couple of comb-throughs to pick up all those references. But yeah.
Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I'd like to indicate I think this is an excellent first steps forward, and it looks like it's really going great. And I know it's a draft, and I'm looking forward to when it's fleshed out. I'm also looking forward to the 12 by 15 official parcel map, 12 by 15 feet. On integrated vision on page 38, I'm going to be very interested in the future that we get a little more integration of where it fits in rather than just referencing the TSP. I've been tracking a lot of TSP activities, but I'm hoping that some of those will fold over and be more a little specific in here rather than just that. I have one question. Protect, repair, and enhance neighborhood livability. What is repair? I'm a little confused on the use of that word. I haven't seen that word before, and I just wanted to know, what is it meant by repair?
I think it means, we came up with these pillar titles in 2011, I think. So I'm trying to think back. But I think actually there was some, as I think back, there was some trying to be consistent with the natural resource, which was protect, restore, and enhance natural resources. And so protect, repair, and so we swapped out, I guess, repair for, or restore for repair. And I think that is that some people in the neighborhoods feel like their neighborhoods have been damaged and want to try to repair that damage.
That means repair. Okay.
Yeah.
An example would be like traffic calming.
Yeah. I have just a comment on page 41. At the top, it says the plan for economic growth rate that is identified in the current economic opportunity analysis. I would just say in the future, unless it's very, very complicated, rather than referencing another document, you just put in what is that growth rate. I mean, it seems like it's a simple, it might just be something simple, but maybe it's not. So
yeah.
I would have liked to have seen it more specific.
Right. Yeah.
And I only have one other thing. I know we're almost out of time. Getting back to what Commissioner Brodsky brought up on flexibility and protection of existing businesses, sort of a retention policy possibly. I'm hoping that in the future that will also include whatever incentive strategies or other things that are going to be under this rather than just land use, because it actually it only refers back to the land supply policies when actually it's under a heading that's somewhat different, and I think it should reflect other things. as part of that policy? That's all I have.
I'll defer mine to the end. We are at 1:30. I've got Commissioners Baker, Taylor, and Borowski in the queue still. Borowski is shaking.
I can pick it up later. I was just looking for the timeline, when we'll see some of the stuff come back.
Mine's very
That's right.
Okay.
I should have earlier too commented that I think you did a really excellent job on putting together this draft. I really think it's a really good start. The one comment I was going to make, a suggestion on the parcel-specific plan. I would suggest that you designate a pilot area to try it in, rather than doing it, and get the city council to designate some area to try it in. So the point is, the advantage of a pilot is you take a small area and you try it in that, and you figure out all your the problems, and so then when you roll it out for the whole area, maybe you figured out how to solve 90% of the problems. So I just suggest that as an approach. You ask the city council to designate some random area that you want to, that they want you to use as a pilot. Then you focus your efforts on that, go through the whole process, and then learn from that experience, and then you roll it out for the rest of the EGB. Just in the high-tech sector.
Kind of beta testing.
Yeah, in the high-tech sector, we use that all the time. We do a small pilot to test things out, and then we learn from that, and then we don't have as much trouble when we do the real thing. So just passing it on.
Thank you. Commissioner Taylor.
Mine really is short. One, Commissioner Duncan addressed my points. Two, Commissioner Jaworski, I actually prefer referencing the plans.
Okay.
And maybe a footnote.
And I'll interject my comments here too. And I'll try and keep them brief. On the map, I'm excited about getting it parcel specific. After all, I think it would solve a lot of the issues that we've had to deal with and interpret along the way. I think on the organization, I really appreciate the way you've got it organized. So I think it is a good start, a good draft. So I affirm that. On the terms with the OAR, I think it might be good if it's possible to, if we're stuck with the OAR terms, to say in our document the OAR term this means also this, and this, or something along those lines to kind of keep those together. And then I too prefer the reference rather than the actual. Sorry, Commissioner Jaworski.
Well, I asked if it was simple.
And I think my reasoning is when that then, for instance, the TSP changes, then it's still referenced and we don't have to actually change the document.
Exactly.
And so if it's a percentage or a number or something like that, if that is in another document that gets changed or is fluid, then our document still stands.
It is.
That's my preference.
Yes. That's where
Words
we've
were
ended.
just reference. What I meant was put in the calculation if it's a percentage and still reference the plan where it's contained. I mean, why does force someone to go back and read it just to get that basic growth rate?
There is a reason, and it's because to amend a policy because a forecast is updated is a legislative action which requires council approval, whereas if we adopt it by reference, we can then adopt it in our supporting documentation if there's a new forecast that comes out. That's specific to the employment growth rate, and the reason we wouldn't want to put it in our policy.
Even if it said currently. Okay.
Yeah.
Policy.
Okay. Well, thank you, Carolyn, Heather, Harry, Alyssa. I see Zach out there too. Are there any other items from staff?
Just a reminder, next Planning Commission meeting will be January 12th.
Okay.
Agenda for that will be forthcoming. Otherwise, have a great holiday break.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll see you next year.
Hey, Robin, any other items from commissions before you? Commissioner Taylor?
Yes, things get more complicated. I want to suggest that maybe we have time limits.
Thank you. All right. Commissioner Baker?
Oh, no, that's mine. That's right.
Yeah.
Just that.
Okay, Commissioner Baker has.
Hold on.
Excuse me. Commissioner Baker has a comment.
Just the Historic Review Board met one of their quarterly meetings last week, and they discussed house moving and the current protections for historic buildings or incentives or protections in Eugene. And they also had sponsored a forum on one of the areas that they've looked at, an updated survey. It was actually in the West University neighborhood, but they plan on updating their surveys of historic buildings. I should inform the commission that in the scope of cities in Oregon, Eugene is pretty much at the bottom of the list in the historic preservation realm. Unfortunately, it's almost at the bottom. So obviously, it's an area that hopefully there'll be some more work on providing incentives or whatever to preserve some of our older structures before they're gone.
All right. With that, we're adjourned.
So